Seung Lee had been missing for 96 hours. Not from a playground. Not from a school. From a fortress. A gated estate in the hills of Gangnam with 23 armed guards, reinforced steel doors, and surveillance cameras that covered every blade of grass. There was no ransom note. No phone call. No trace. Just an empty bed, still warm, and a single small sneaker left in the middle of the floor, as if the boy had simply evaporated. The kind of disappearance that didn't happen by accident. The kind that sent a message. Seoul knew the name Seung Lee the way it knew the Han River, always present, cold, and capable of swallowing you whole without a sound. He controlled import routes from Busan to Incheon. Judges took his calls on the first ring. Rival bosses crossed the street when his black Mercedes rolled through Itaewon. He had never, not once in 44 years, been touched. Until tonight. Tonight, Seung Lee stood alone in his son's bedroom, one hand pressed flat against the wall, his three-piece charcoal suit still perfect, his hair still slicked back without a single strand out of place. His advisors were downstairs, shouting into phones. His enforcers were already on the streets, armed and furious. But Seung Lee was not moving. He was staring at a half-finished drawing on the nightstand, a crayon sketch of a man in a suit holding hands with a small boy, and for the first time since he was 9 years old, Seung Lee was trembling. The $10 million bounty had already been announced by midnight. By 2 a.m., it had turned Seoul into a city of wolves, every criminal and informant crawling out of the dark chasing the money. By 3 a.m., 47 false tips had come in. 3 men had already been hospitalized for bringing wrong information to the gate. Nothing. No one knew anything. Or so they thought. The arrival, the unexpected solution. At 3:47 a.m., the head guard at the Lee Estate's Iron Gate received a call from the south perimeter. There's a foreigner at the fence. Old. Homeless. Says his dog found something. The guard laughed. Get rid of him. But before the order could be carried out, a voice crackled back through the radio, confused and slightly unsteady. Sir, the dog has the boy's scarf. The one from the missing report. The blue one with the dragon stitching. I don't know how. Silence on the line. Then, somewhere deep in the estate, a door opened. Seung Lee walked out of his son's room for the first time in 4 hours, his tie loosened by a single inch, the only crack in the armor, and said 4 words in a voice so quiet the guards had to lean in to hear him. Bring them to me. Standing at the gate, completely still in the amber glow of the estate floodlights, was a tall, hunched old man in a ragged army fatigue jacket and a pulled-low beanie. His skin was cracked and weathered like old leather left in the rain. And beside him, sitting patient and still as a statue, was a golden retriever. Fur gone mostly grey, a jagged scar crossing his nose, half his left ear missing, holding a dirty tennis ball in his mouth. The dog wasn't barking. He was just watching the door. Like he'd done this before. Like he'd been waiting. If you love powerful stories, like this video, subscribe so you never miss one, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let's get into it. Seung Lee had been missing for 96 hours. Not from a park. Not from a school field trip. From a fortified estate on the outskirts of Chicago, a property surrounded by iron fencing, motion sensor floodlights, and 14 armed men who rotated shifts like soldiers on a forward operating base. There had been no ransom note. No phone call in the dark. No trace left behind except a single small sneaker, sitting perfectly upright in the center of his bedroom floor, as if the boy had simply stepped out of it and into the air. The kind of disappearance that didn't happen by accident. The kind that was engineered. The kind that sent a message to a man who thought himself untouchable. Chicago knew the name Seung Lee the way it knew the cold that came off Lake Michigan in February. Inescapable, bone deep, and indifferent to anyone who stood in its way. He controlled the import corridors from the port of Chicago to the warehouses lining the Calumet River. Federal judges returned his calls. Rival bosses crossed the street when his black Escalade rolled through Bridgeport. He had never, not once in 44 years, been made to beg. Until tonight. Tonight, Seung Lee stood alone in his son's bedroom in a three-piece charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, one hand pressed flat against the wall, staring at a half-finished crayon drawing on the nightstand. A man in a suit. A small boy. Both of them holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The handwriting beneath it, shaky and proud the way only a 7-year-old's handwriting can be, read, "Me and Appa." Downstairs, his advisors were shouting into phones. His enforcers were already fanning out across the city. The $10 million bounty had gone out through back channels by midnight, and by 2 a.m. it had turned Chicago's underworld into a feeding frenzy. Every informant, every street-level operator, every opportunist with a burner phone crawling out of the dark chasing the money. 42 tips had come in. None of them led anywhere. 3 men had been hospitalized for wasting Seung Lee's time. Nothing. The most powerful man in the Chicago underworld stood in his missing son's bedroom, and he had absolutely nothing. At 3:47 a.m., the guard at the estate's south gate received a radio call from the perimeter team. "There's a man at the fence. Old. Homeless. Says his dog found something." The guard laughed out loud. "Run him off." But the radio crackled back 30 seconds later, the voice on the other end no longer steady. "Sir, the dog has the boy's jacket. The blue one with the dragon patch on the sleeve. The one from the missing alert. I don't know how." Silence. Then, from somewhere deep inside the house, a door opened. Seung Lee walked out of his son's bedroom for the first time in 5 hours, his tie loosened by a single inch, the only crack in the armor, and said 4 words so quietly the guard beside him had to read his lips. "Bring them to me." Standing at the iron gate in the amber wash of the floodlights was Penn Philips. He was tall but hunched, with the kind of posture that comes not from weakness but from years of folding yourself into doorways and underpasses and places not built for human beings. His skin was the color and texture of cracked parchment, weathered by decades of American sun and American cold in equal measure. He wore a ragged army fatigue jacket 2 sizes too large, a relic of another life, and a grey wool beanie pulled low over his ears. His hands, large, scarred, deliberate, hung at his sides. And beside him, sitting perfectly still on the cracked sidewalk, was Sarge. The golden retriever's fur had gone mostly grey, the gold of his youth bleached out by age and weather. A jagged scar ran across the bridge of his nose. Half of his left ear was gone, an old wound, long-heeled. He held a dirty tennis ball in his mouth with the calm, unhurried patience of an animal that had learned long ago that stillness was power. He wasn't barking. He wasn't straining at any leash. He was simply watching the front door of the estate with eyes that were steady and deep and somehow, impossibly, sad. When Seung Lee stepped through the gate and looked down at the dog, Sarge looked back up at him. Then the dog looked toward the dark city beyond the fence, and back again. Once. Twice. Penn's voice, when it came, was gravel worn smooth by a river. He knows where your boy is. He found the scent 2 miles south of here in a storm drain on Halstead. He's been pulling me north ever since. All I need is for you to let us lead. Seung Lee looked at the old homeless man in the army jacket. Then at the aging, scarred dog. Then at the crayon drawing he was still holding in his left hand. He folded it carefully, put it in his breast pocket, over his heart. How long do we have? Penn looked at the sky. The stars were fading. Before dawn. Maybe less. His advisors lost their minds. Kwon, his head of security, stepped directly into Sung's path in the driveway, a thick hand pressed flat against the Escalade door. You're going to follow a street dog and a vagrant into the city at 4 in the morning. Are you listening to yourself? He kept his voice low, professional, but his jaw was tight. Move, Kwon. Sir, we have people. Your people have brought me 42 lies in 6 hours. Move. There was a beat of silence. Then Kwon stepped aside. They moved on foot, Sung's orders. Less conspicuous. Penn led, Sarge slightly ahead of him on a length of old parachute cord looped loosely around the dog's chest. The animal's nose swept the ground in long, slow arcs, unhurried, methodical, like a craftsman who had done this 10,000 times and had nothing left to prove. Kwon and 2 other men followed at a distance, hands inside their jackets. The city at 4 a.m. was a different country. Steam rose from the grates. Garbage trucks groaned in the distance. A lone taxi drifted through a yellow light 3 blocks east. The Chicago wind came off the lake with teeth in it, cutting through Sung's suit, finding every gap. He watched Penn walk. Despite the hunch, despite the worn boots with a split left sole that he could hear scraping the sidewalk with each step, the old man moved with a certain deliberateness. A precision. His eyes were always moving, checking corners, reading windows, scanning rooftops. Old training, Sung thought. The kind that doesn't leave you. How long were you in? Penn didn't slow down. 22 years. Army EOD. He said it the way men say things they've put behind glass, visible, but not available for handling. Explosives. Diffusing them. Mostly in places nobody wanted to think about. Sung said nothing. He looked down at Sarge, still sweeping, still pulling forward with that quiet, absolute certainty. What happened to him? A long pause. Long enough that Sung thought the answer wasn't coming. Same thing that happened to me, Penn said finally. We just survived it differently. Sarge led them into the Maxwell Street night market at 4:20 a.m., and the world went from empty to overwhelming in a single block. Even at this hour the market breathed, food carts draped in plastic sheeting, music leaking from somewhere inside a shuttered warehouse, the warm, complicated smell of 100 different things cooking at once. People moved through it the way people move through places where no one asks your name. Quick, anonymous, eyes forward. Kwon put a hand on Penn's shoulder. The dog will lose the scent in here. There's too much interference. Penn looked at the hand. Then at Kwon. He didn't say a word. Sarge never broke stride. He moved through the crowd like water finding a channel, nose never lifting from the ground except to check the air, his grey body weaving between legs and carts and stacked produce boxes with an ease that felt almost surgical. The tennis ball stayed in his mouth the whole time. He didn't snap at anyone, didn't shy away from the noise, didn't falter once in the noise and the press and the competing smells of the city's middle-of-the-night life. He stopped at a plywood door on the west edge of the market. Saturday. Looked up at Penn. Then looked at the door. Penn crouched beside him, ran one weathered hand slowly along the dog's spine. "Good boy," he said, so quietly it was almost just breath. Good boy." Seung looked at the door. His jaw tightened. Kwon already had his hand inside his jacket. "He was here," Penn said, standing. "Recently. But they moved him." Seung turned to look at his head of security. Kwon had worked for him for 11 years. How would they have known to move him? The question hung in the cold air like smoke. Nobody answered it. They rested under the Columbus Drive overpass at 5 a.m. while Sarge reacquired the scent from a secondary trail. Penn had been watching the dog build for the last half mile. Seung sat on the concrete embankment in his charcoal suit, his leather shoes already destroyed by the mud and the wet and the grinding of Chicago streets, and watched the river move below them in the dark. Penn settled beside him with the slow, careful architecture of a man whose body had taken on a great deal of damage and learned to negotiate with it. For a long time neither of them spoke. "You had a family," Seung said finally. It wasn't a question. Penn looked at the water. "A wife. A daughter. Renata and little Bea." He said the names the way you handle something you've kept in a drawer for a long time, carefully, aware of how fragile it still is. Renata got tired of waiting for a man who kept redeploying. Left when Bea was 4. I don't blame her. A pause. Bea died in a car accident 7 years ago. She was 19. The river moved. The wind pushed. I had no one to save by then, Penn continued. And saving people was the only thing I ever knew how to do. So when there was nobody left, he did not finish. He did not need to. Seung reached into his breast pocket, unfolded the crayon drawing, held it so Penn could see it. Penn looked at it for a long time. "He draws you like you're a hero," the old man said. "He doesn't know what I am." "No." Penn took a breath. "But he knows what you are to him. That's the only version of you that matters to a 7-year-old. Seung folded the drawing back up. His hands were not quite steady. Across the embankment, Sarge had gone very still. His nose was in the air. His tail, the first time it had moved all night, made 2 slow sweeps. Penn was on his feet before Seung could speak. "He's got it. Let's go. Thumbs up sign if you're still with me, like this right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive." Now back to it. The secondary site was a shuttered dry cleaning business on South Wentworth, 3 blocks from the edge of Chinatown. The front lock had been cut and replaced with a new one, recently, judging by the brightness of the brass. Sarge sat down hard at the threshold and would not go inside, which Penn said meant the boy had been held here but was already gone. Kwon swept the interior. Clean. Too clean. But Penn found the burner phone in 40 seconds flat, behind a loose heating vent in the back room, tucked inside a folded fast food bag. He found it the way a man finds things when he's spent decades learning that the things people want hidden are always in the most obvious places once you stop looking with your eyes and start looking with your hands. He passed it to Seung without a word. There were 4 text messages on it. The most recent, sent at 1 a.m., read, his asking questions. Move the package to the harbor site. Use the back road. The number it was sent from was unfamiliar to Seung. But the contact name saved in the phone was not. It was a nickname. One that only 6 people in the world would recognize as belonging to Raymond Cho, Seung Lee's second-in-command for 9 years. The man who had been in the war room at the estate all night, coordinating the search, fielding the tips, managing the response. The man who would have known exactly when to move the boy. Seung Lee did not make a sound. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. He simply stood there in the dark back room of the shuttered dry cleaner and went very, very still. The way a thing goes still right before it becomes something else entirely. Penn watched him from the doorway. "The harbor," Penn said quietly. "That's where the dog wants to go. Has been pulling that direction for the last mile." Seung turned. His eyes, for the first time all night, were no longer frozen glass. They were something hotter than that. "Then we go to the harbor." The Calumet Harbor Industrial Strip at 5:45 a.m. was a landscape from the end of the world. Rusted machinery, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, the smell of salt and diesel and cold water that never quite went away no matter the season. The warehouses here were old, most of them decommissioned, the kind of places that appeared on no current city maps and attracted no attention from anyone who didn't already know about them. Sarge broke into a trot. Penn didn't try to slow him. He matched the pace, limping hard on his left knee but not stopping, his eyes moving from the dog to the shadows between the buildings and back again. They came to a salt storage warehouse at the far end of the pier, a massive rectangular structure, corrugated steel, with a loading bay facing the water. The bay door was down. A single light burned in the high window on the east wall. Sarge stopped outside the northwest corner. Set down his tennis ball. Looked up at Penn with an expression that Penn, in 20 years of working with dogs, had learned to read like a sentence. "He's in there," Penn said. "And they know we're here." He'd barely finished the words when the light in the window went out. Kwon already had his phone to his ear, moving fast toward the east wall. Seung stood completely still, looking at the building, and Penn noticed that his hand had gone to his breast pocket, to the folded drawing, and pressed flat against it, the same gesture he'd made hours ago against the wall of his son's bedroom. Penn picked up the tennis ball and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he knelt beside Sarge and pressed his forehead against the dog's. "One more time, old soldier," he whispered. "One more time." They breached the warehouse from 2 sides, Kwon's men through the loading bay, Seung and Penn through a side access door that Penn forced with a technique so practiced it seemed like muscle memory. The interior was cavernous. Salt dust hung in the air like a fine snow that never fell. The smell was sharp and ancient. And from somewhere deep in the back of the building, behind a secondary wall of stacked steel pallets, they heard it, a child's cough. Small. Exhausted. Alive. Seung Lee moved without thinking. Penn grabbed his arm. "Hard. It's a trap. Look at the floor." The concrete floor was wet. Not from rain. From the drainage channels built along both walls, industrial runoff channels, wide and deep, that connected to the lake through underground pipes. Someone had opened the inlet valves. Water was already spreading from the east wall inward, slow and cold and black. Penn scanned the space in 4 seconds. Old habits. The boy was being held in a sealed containment room, an old cold storage unit built into the northwest corner, thick walls, no windows. The water would fill it in 20 minutes once it reached the door seals. The men who'd been in this building were gone. They'd triggered the flood remotely and cleared out. They didn't need to be here for what happened next. Kwon kicked the containment door. Steel. Reinforced. It moved less than a millimeter. Penn walked the perimeter of the room in the rising water, already ankle-deep now, his hands pressing every surface, searching. There. A ventilation shaft in the upper wall of the containment room, 18 inches wide, covered by a corroded grate. Too small for any of them. Too small for any of them except Sarge. Penn looked at the dog. Sarge looked back. Penn reached into his pocket and took out the tennis ball. He pried the grate free with his bare hands, the corroded metal taking skin off his palms, and he did not stop or slow down. Sarge. Up. The dog was in the shaft in seconds, tennis ball in his mouth, hindquarters disappearing into the dark. Penn pressed his ear to the wall and listened. A moment of silence. Then, from inside the containment room, he heard the sound he was hoping for, a child's gasp of surprise, then a small voice saying something that wasn't words but was unmistakably the sound of a frightened boy being suddenly and profoundly less frightened. Seung made a sound that wasn't a word either. Penn turned to the gears. The lock mechanism on the containment door was operated by a handwheel system on the exterior wall, an old industrial design, but the wheel had been jammed, a steel rod fed through the spokes and welded in place. Improvised. Brutal. Effective. He needed to break the weld. The water was at his shins. He worked the rod back and forth with both hands, feeling the weld crack at its weakest point, his shoulders screaming, his bad knee submerged, the cold working its way up through him layer by layer. Kwon moved in beside him, adding his weight. Still not enough. Seung Lee took off his suit jacket, folded it once out of a habit so old it was involuntary, and dropped it into the black water. He stepped up beside Penn, gripped the rod, and pulled. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then the weld gave with a sound like a gunshot, and the rod spun free, and Penn hit the floor face first in 8 inches of freezing water. He didn't get up immediately. Seung spun the wheel. The door seal broke. Water rushed into the containment room and a golden-grey dog paddled out first, still carrying the tennis ball, and then came Seung Lee, 7 years old, soaking wet, unhurt, his arms outstretched. He said one word. Appa. Seung Lee caught his son and held him and did not let go. He went to his knees in the water without any apparent awareness that he was doing it, and the most feared man in Chicago's underworld held his boy and made a sound that the men in that room would carry with them for the rest of their lives. From the floor of the warehouse, Penn Philips lay on his back in the receding water, eyes to the ceiling, breathing. Sarge paddled over and put his grey head on Penn's chest. Penn put his hand on the dog. Good boy, he said to the ceiling. Good boy. By the time paramedics reached the warehouse, Penn's core temperature had dropped enough that he couldn't stand unassisted. His left knee was severely swollen from the hours of walking and the cold. His palms were a mess of torn skin. He had been quietly hypothermic for the last 30 minutes of the operation and had said nothing about it to anyone. The first responders moved toward him with a stretcher. Seung Lee was already there. He was still holding his son, Jun's legs wrapped around his waist, the boy's head pressed into his neck. But his free arm was already under Penn's shoulders, helping him up from the floor with a steadiness and care that made Kwon look at the ground. I've got you, Seung said. Penn looked at him. For a moment the old man's face was unguarded, all the years and all the loss and all the long, invisible nights of it right there on the surface, nothing held back. "You don't have to." "I know," Seung said. "I want to." Sarge was shaking badly from the cold. Penn tried to take him from the paramedic who had scooped the dog up, but his arms weren't working properly anymore. Seung handed Minute-jun to Kwon. Then he took Sarge from the paramedic, both arms, the way you carry something that matters, and walked out of the salt warehouse into the gray Chicago dawn with a Mafia boss's $1,000 suit destroyed beyond saving, his son's crayon drawing still in his breast pocket, and an old gray dog cradled against his chest. Someone had called the press. They were at the perimeter. Cameras caught it all. By that evening, the image was everywhere. Seung Lee, the black dragon of the Chicago underworld, carrying a limping golden retriever out of a harbor warehouse while a homeless veteran was loaded onto a stretcher behind him. In the background, a small boy was reaching back toward the dog, one hand outstretched, still holding a dirty tennis ball. Chicago had never seen anything like it. Nobody who saw it knew quite how to explain it. But everyone who saw it understood it. Raymond Cho was taken into custody before noon. The men who had held Minute-jun scattered within 48 hours, some arrested, some simply gone. Seung Lee's organization absorbed the shock the way old, deep-rooted things absorb storms. Damaged but standing. Penn spent 4 days at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Hypothermia, a fractured bone in his left knee, and lacerations to both hands. The room he was given had a window that looked east toward the lake, and the morning light came through it clean and gold. Sarge was treated at a veterinary clinic on the north side and declared, with some professional surprise, to be in remarkable health for his age. He slept on Penn's hospital bed every night in violation of about a dozen regulations that the nursing staff had collectively decided not to enforce. On the 4th day, Seung Lee arrived at the hospital room with Minute-jun beside him. The boy went straight to Sarge. He sat on the edge of the bed and let the old dog put his head in his lap, and he held the tennis ball in both hands and turned it over and over like it was something precious. "He gave me this," Minute-jun said, without looking up. "When it was dark. So I wouldn't be scared." Penn looked at his dog. Sarge, eyes half closed, tail moving slow and steady, accepted the attention with the grace of something that has given everything it has and is at peace with it. Seung set a folded envelope on Penn's bedside table. "There's a property," he said. "On the North Shore. Quiet. Big yard. It's been empty 2 years. It's yours, with enough to live on for the rest of your life, and a foundation set up in your name for veterans experiencing homelessness in this city." Penn looked at the envelope for a long time. Then at the man who'd put it there. "I didn't do it for the money." "I know," Seung said. And then, in front of his son and his men and the nurses pretending not to watch from the hallway, Seung Lee, the black dragon, the man who made judges take his calls on the first ring, bowed. Not a nod. Not a tilt of the head. A full, slow, deliberate bow. The bow of a man who means it. Penn didn't speak for a moment. His eyes were bright and his voice, when it came, was the Graveland River voice of a man who had been invisible for so long that being seen felt almost like a physical thing. "Tell your boy," Penn said, "that the dog's name is Sarge. And that Sarge says he was very brave." Minute-jun looked up from the dog. His face broke open into the specific, unguarded joy that belongs only to children and to people who have just come back from somewhere very dark. I know his name, the boy said proudly. He told me. Penn laughed. It was a sound that hadn't come out of him in a long time, rough and real and completely unguarded. Sarge's tail thumped twice against the bed. Outside, the lake moved under a wide November sky, and the city went on being the city, indifferent and enormous and full of invisible people doing invisible things that no one would ever see or record or remember. Except for this one. This one they would remember. And that is where our story ends. Penn Philips walked into that night invisible, a man the world had decided didn't matter anymore. No address. No title. No one waiting up for him. Just an old dog, a dirty tennis ball, and a lifetime of pain he carried so quietly that nobody ever thought to ask about it. But when a 7-year-old boy needed someone to walk through the dark, it was Penn who showed up. It was Sarge who led the way. And it was a Mafia boss, mud on his $1,000 shoes and a crayon drawing over his heart, who finally understood that the most powerful thing in any room is not always the most obvious one. Some people get forgotten by the world. That doesn't mean the world was right to forget them. If this story reminded you that every person you pass on the street has a whole life behind their eyes, leave a red heart hash right now. Not for the algorithm. For Penn. For every veteran sleeping under a bridge tonight who once ran toward danger so the rest of us didn't have to. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because I drop stories like this regularly. Stories about forgotten people doing unforgettable things. You do not want to miss what's coming next. And before you go, I need you to do one thing for me. Scroll down to the comments right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Are you in Lagos, London, Atlanta, Toronto, Johannesburg, Manila? Drop your city. Drop your country. I will come through those comments and say hello personally, because you are not just a viewer to me. You are part of the reason these stories get told. This story went from a homeless man at a gate, to a Mafia boss on his knees in floodwater, to a dog being carried out of a harbor at dawn. Because one old soldier refused to believe his best days were behind him. And because sometimes, the most broken thing in the room is exactly what saves you. I'll see you in the next one. Black Heart. Don't forget, like, subscribe, comment your location. Let's keep going.